Hello, beautiful souls. Jessica and Lexi here. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Steph Lopez. I'm so excited to have her on the podcast. So, Dr. Steph is a former NASA psychologist turned mindset, emotion, and communication coach for powerful women. She's the founder of the Brave Method and uses eye-opening self-discovery tools to guide high-achieving women, particularly those who grew up with a troubled relationship with their mom, and help them get in the driver's seat of their emotions and reactions so that they can feel happier, calmer, and lighter. I mean, what a more perfect guest could there be? Dr. Steph, we're so excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so incredibly excited to have you here as well. And I'm just listening to your intro and I'm like, sign us all up. I feel like that's such an amazing thing that you're doing for women and for moms and for females all around. So I'm just excited to dive more into it with you as well. I know you and I know each other a little bit privately, but I feel like I really want everybody, and we want everybody to know who you are and why, how you got into becoming an entrepreneur, and maybe a little bit of your background as well.
Okay, so I'll just dive into it.
Please, that
Well,
would be
Um,
great.
tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, the NASA
yeah,
psychologist part, that seems like a big nugget of information, and then like
yeah,
choosing to leave to
yeah.
follow your own dreams. I mean, I'm sure that was a hard decision. So maybe take us back to like a little bit of a backstory and then that point at NASA when you were like, this is not aligned for me anymore.
Yes. Okay, so I'll start in the middle. I started working at NASA February 2013, and that year I took a workshop that I had heard a wide variety of things about. Like, this is the most life-changing experience, all the way to it's the crying class, to after he went to it, he got divorced. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm walking into, but I'm ready, as ready as I can be. So I walk into this white room with chairs in a circle, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what kind of training this is, but here we go, because it's at work. And I'm going to tell you, by noon on day one, it was a 5 day workshop. I have goosebumps right now. I was like, I have to spread this to as many people as possible. Like, it was from moment one, the most powerful experience of my life. So I'm gonna like hop back a little bit. I,
Okay.
going into the workshop, was a perfectionist, was a people pleaser, was, you know, ambitious, control freak, anxious all the time, had it all together on the outside, but on the inside was like, oh my gosh, like I do not feel the way that I want to feel. And what that workshop showed me was that nothing was wrong with me and that I was missing key life skills. And even though at that point I already had my master's in psychology, this 5 days was more impactful than that.
Wow.
And
Than your
yeah.
entire career in psychology.
It really was. So let's see, where should we? So what I did at NASA, just for context, I was basically a leadership coach and an organizational psychologist. So I focused on how do we help everyone at the organization be more productive, happier, get along better, achieve more. And what I found is that almost always the answer fell into three areas: self acceptance, self accountability, and self awareness. And that is the foundation of everything that I do today. So when people are like, how did you go from that to this? It's actually like pretty seamless transition. I just took the part of my job that I liked, and now that's what I do all the time. Rather than all the other
Yes,
tasks.
yeah, all that
Yeah.
foundational knowledge. I think people sometimes do a complete career pivot or like, I'm not really I'm not a journalist and I studied journalism, so like,
Yeah.
but I still use a lot of the things that I learned. We use all of these experiences from our life and from our education in maybe
Yeah.
just in a different way or in a way that fits you better in the life that you wanted for yourself.
Absolutely.
So it was in that first half of the day of the workshop. Did you know in that moment that you were like, I got to do something different? Or was it at the end of the little workshop?
It was by lunch on day one, literally by noon.
Wow.
So I didn't know what that meant, and I loved working at NASA. I thought that I was going to work there my entire life. So I would always say after that, like, oh, my next career, after I retire, because I just didn't think I was going to leave because it's the number one place to work in the federal government in the US. So, and like, who leaves NASA, right? Me.
That must have felt a little scary to be
Oh
halfway
my God.
through a multi-day workshop and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna make a change." Like, did you
Hmm.
feel it in your body? How did that come about?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I think it was my intuition. I just like, I don't know. I just knew. Like, I knew, like, this
Mm.
is what I'm supposed to do. I just had that clarity. But then I didn't actually do anything. That was 2013, and I didn't leave NASA till January 2021.
Okay.
So I
That was going
sat
to be
on
my
it.
next question was, yeah, that was going to be my next question for you, really, is like you were in that workshop and that was years and years before
Hmm.
you actually decided to leave. So walk us through that journey of, you said
Yeah.
7 years, right? Before you had that workshop, you had this transformational experience, you had the
Mhm.
clarity that you needed to do something different, but yet you waited 7 years to act on that. Walk us through that. Maybe what was going on in your life or what maybe
Yeah.
held you back from jumping in sooner? What was the pivotal moment for you next in
Yeah.
deciding, okay, I'm going to go all in on myself and my business?
Yeah. So perfectionist, right? Fear of failure. Um, Basically, like that's if you asked me then, I probably would not have said that. I would have said, well, well, no, maybe I would have. My mom has always been an entrepreneur, and I decided like I am not doing that. I'm not going through that struggle. So never say never. But
Right?
what? Oh, I didn't hear
Yeah,
what you
I
said.
I'm just I'm yeah, no, I'm totally agreeing and I recovering perfectionist over
Yeah.
here, so I can feel you. Yeah, like there is a certain point where it is stepping out of ego and stepping out of fear, and
Yes.
that's where a lot of the transformation happens, but it's really really hard to do, especially as somebody who has perfectionism tendencies and the fear of
Yes.
failure, like that can make taking the leap exponentially harder, you know?
Hmm.
We don't
Yeah.
really realize that maybe these limiting beliefs about ourselves are
Mm.
holding us
Oh my
back, or
gosh.
these, emotions that are maybe going on. Maybe the one thing that's holding us back, that if we different had a different frame or a different reframe, that we might take that leap sooner. So fast forward to 7 years later, and you
Yeah.
decided to make the change. What was that
Yeah.
transition like for you? Was there a single point at that transition where you're like, you knew you needed to step out? Tell us more
Yeah.
about that.
Mm.
Yeah. So I had my second baby March 25th, 2020. And that was a few days after the world shut down and everyone was terrified and we were all locked in our house. And so I went from, working outside the home 50, 55 hours, 40 minutes away from where I live, having my daughter in daycare the whole time, to suddenly, literally like a couple days later, being locked in the house with a newborn, postpartum hormones, a 2-year old, and no idea what I was doing. I'm like, I don't even know how to take care of a 2-year old full time because I don't do that. And now we can't even leave the house. So I hit a low point, like probably one of the lowest points in my life. And I got sick like 3 weeks in a row, for the first month postpartum, and just was like really, really struggling. And finally, about less than 3 months into it, I was like, I know how to help myself. Like, because I was almost to the point, like, maybe I need medication, and nothing against medication, but it's just not something that I really wanted to do. And so it just hit me, and I felt in that moment really inspired to like make massive changes. And it was never that I like didn't like working at NASA. This like came as a shock to everyone. Like I was at the top of my career working with executives. It was going amazing. And I'm like, by the way, guys, I'm gonna leave. I felt like I was gonna puke for a week straight, to be completely honest. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge step
Yeah.
in a different direction. That your body was telling you, you know, even the world was like, pandemic, it's
Mm-hmm.
time, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how did you know, you know, did you know what your pivot was, that you still wanted to do something similar? Did you know you wanted to work with women, or was it kind of like, I have no idea, but I just know I need change?
Yeah. So that when that was like June 2020 when I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. But what I told myself is my goal was to like replace my NASA income and leave by the time my oldest was 5, going into kindergarten, and she just turned 5 last month. So I left earlier than anticipated. I went back on maternity leave and I tried to work a full time job with 2 kids and a baby and a side hustle. And I was like, well, there might be some people that can do this, but it's not me. And I knew, oh, so I think to answer your question, I knew at that point that I wanted to work with mostly moms who were struggling emotionally, whether with anxiety or with yelling, or with, feeling like asking them this question of like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I feel more in control of my emotions and my reactions? And that passion came from my own childhood and everything that I learned in that workshop and beyond.
That's really powerful. Yeah. We learn a lot as children from our parents, and
Mhm.
they may or may not be the things that we want to be as parents. And but it's kind of ingrained in our nature, right? It's just how we're raised, and so it's powerful that you were able to see that
Yeah.
and decide to help other women with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
If we have, you know, I think oftentimes we hear, oh, perfectionism, or we might not even know we're struggling with that. So, could you give us some idea of like what did you notice in yourself? What do you think that are some of the telltale signs of being a perfectionist and an overachiever, if you will, in a maybe healthy way, but then an unhealthy way? Because I really loved how you also said, I found out I'm all these things, but I also found out that those things aren't bad. I just needed tools and strategies to support who I am. So I would love to kind of maybe even hear from your experience, but then also how you work with women too, perfectionism and highlighting that a little bit and some of the negative tendencies, but also some of the really beautiful positive tendencies that could come from that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to list like some telltale signs. All or nothing thinking, maybe black and white thinker, highly critical, being pushed by fear of anything being less than perfect, not thinking it's okay to make mistakes, unrealistic standards, focusing really on those results. Sometimes procrastination. Not all perfectionists deal with procrastination that much, but oftentimes fear of failure. I said that one earlier. And ultimately, what is that coming from? A fear of judgment and rejection. So not basically not having the tolerance to put themselves in situations where they will be rejected or judged and know that that's okay.
Okay, question stemming from that.
Yeah.
Is this something that we are born with, or something that is learned?
Learned. Learned. So this
Maybe a little bit
really,
of both, or
I I would say learned. So we all have emotions that are positive and negative, and many of us, from the time that we are very small, learn to cut off negative emotions. And that comes from a place where our caregivers are often thinking that that is how to regulate yourself, and or they are uncomfortable with negative emotions, so they cut it off. So this could look like, hushing them, shushing them, sending them to their rooms and saying, come back when you are ready to be nice. It could look like they fall, they get hurt, and the parent says, you're fine. And so all of these things, these messaging, they basically result in the individual learning trust what's coming from the outside more than yourself, and cut off your emotions. And so a huge part of the work that I do with people, that I learned that I had to do with myself, and that's related to perfectionism, is expanding your tolerance for all emotions. Because if you revolve your world around avoiding feeling rejected, then who has the power?
hmm.
Everybody else. Rejection has the power. You don't have it anymore. So a
Hmm.
perfectionist often identifies as a control freak, but they're controlling so that they don't experience things. So they're not in control. They're actually handing over control to everybody else.
Wow, I feel like you have to repeat that. That's pretty wild to phrase it that way. So when you are thinking that you are in control, you're actually giving control to others. Or if you're
Yeah.
trying to over control a situation, you're giving control to other people.
Yes. Yes.
Because you're allowing them to decide what happens, but then that also can almost, it makes me feel like it could spiral the negative way too, where then you're feeling out of control again.
Yes, absolutely. And so the goal is acceptance, radical acceptance of like, no
Mm.
matter what happens, it's okay. Like in this moment, I don't have to fight this moment. That's not how I was raised. And most people that I encounter, maybe I'm biased because of the work that I do, but they're fighting the moment that they're in constantly. And my goodness, does that bring up a lot. And so when we learn, there's a lot of tools to this, but this is one big piece. When you learn that, like, I don't have to fight this moment. And when I choose to put my energy towards solutions, life feels a lot easier versus if I'm fighting this moment. I'll give an example. So, like, this is when it really, really hit me. I was working on really embodying mindful awareness, radical acceptance, like all the surrender. As a control freak, I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm going to try to do this. And this is the moment that it really, really hit me. I was working at NASA. I got in my car, turned on the car, and I saw that I had 60 miles left to the gallon. And I had to pick up my daughter from daycare, and I lived about 40 miles away. So I was like, okay, well, I'll get gas afterwards. So we know where this is going. Right. So I pick her up, I jump on the interstate, and then at some point on the way home, I push down the gas pedal and nothing happens. And I realized, like, okay, I totally ran out of gas. So the old me would have made the phone call for help, but then I would have beat myself up, because when you are a perfectionist, making mistakes is not okay. And if you make mistakes, what are you supposed to do? Beat yourself up. So I would have thought things like, you saw your gas tank. Now my daughter was like 1 or a little less than 1. You put her in a bad situation. Now you're on the side of the road. You're wasting time. You're not going to be able to get, like all of these, you're not going to be able to get dinner made, beat ourselves up, right? What I did this time with this, like embodying these new skills, I made the phone call. I got out of the car, opened her car door, unbuckled her seatbelt, went to the other side of the car, and we played. That is acceptance. That is not fighting the moment that you're in. And that is what all of us can learn to do in every single moment, every single day. And my goodness, does it make life feel a lot easier.
I feel like you've just unlocked the key for a lot of people listening right now is like that's such a beautiful like transformation that you can make in that moment, although probably not easy and takes time and repetition and practice, but being okay in the discomfort and accepting the discomfort that comes with it reminds me a little bit about our podcast start here with our tech issues. Like, as we are navigating this journey for the first time, constantly reminding ourselves that we're not going to be perfect at this because we are learning in the moment and learning on the fly. And that's something that I've had to remind myself of frequently. But also, I love the example that you gave with your daughter of like, now it's not only ourselves, but we're involving other people. And that's where I think as moms, if we can
Yeah.
pivot to motherhood even, but even as moms, we carry even more weight and more of a load and heavier guilt, if you will, if we do quote unquote make a mistake that affects now our children. For me, I think like perfectionist tendencies don't come up as much individually, but if it's with my children, then they scream really loud. And that's
Mm.
something that I definitely have to work through as well. And I'm learning to. So I really like that tangible example that you gave us when something like that arises in a moment with children.
You're welcome. I'm glad that resonated.
So, as somebody who has probably more perfectionism tendencies than you, Jess, I think, because you're like, you've got this free spirit and you brought up that you have a little bit of it. Um, I do feel like perfectionism comes a lot from, some of the things you mentioned, like go to your room, not being allowed to express emotions. I'm trying to be perfect in every moment as a
Mhm.
child.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you help with some of that healing. And
Yeah.
but you brought something else up that was I haven't heard it that way and it actually hit me hard is that the parent might not actually be able to accept the emotions. It's something that the parent is dealing with. So not even that they just want you to go to your room because you're not perfect and they don't love you, but it's actually just that they don't themselves don't know how to process the child's emotions. So
Yeah.
maybe as like a parent who is struggling or might be struggling with toddler tantrums or things because of this like perfectionism, but also this vulnerability that they're uncomfortable with, like what can you do in that scenario? How do you
Yeah.
learn through that and grow through that?
Yeah. So just like I mentioned, but maybe like in a slightly different way, we can tell if you look at somebody, you can tell how comfortable they are with their own emotions by how they interact and show up when you express negative emotions. So you might have somebody where you express that you're having a bad day or that you haven't been doing well lately, and they try to make you feel better or try to look for the silver lining or try to look on the bright side. It's not hard and fast, but that is a very good indication that they are not comfortable with their own negative emotions, which means that they cannot create the space for you to express it. And that is important in so many areas of our lives. But since you mentioned it in motherhood, we if we want to be able to do that for our children, we have to expand our tolerance. And I mean, this is going to sound like, okay, it can't be that simple, Steph. And there are lots of tools behind it. But really, it is putting yourself in the situation to feel the thing that you don't want to feel and proving to yourself that not only can you cope with it, but that you're not going to die, like everything's going to be okay. And so when we do this like little bit over time, you're sending a message to yourself that you can handle it. You're building your self efficacy is what it's called, your belief in yourself. And sometimes depending on people's upbringing, they may need to regulate their nervous system, and there's all kinds of ways to do that. So I've got lots of tools to help, but ultimately what it comes down to is like do the thing that you're avoiding. Feel
Yeah,
the
and
thing you're avoiding.
yeah, and oftentimes with a negative emotion or oftentimes, putting yourself in that situation where somebody brings up something negative, oftentimes I think if we grew up in that environment or we don't know any better, those are the tools that we have in the moment. It's easy to project to say,
Yeah.
oh, well, everything will be fine, or at least you have a job, like, or at least you, like, if someone's complaining about, a hard day at work and somebody says, well, at least you have a job, it's like, well, that is not really helpful. But
Right.
that can also drive a perfectionism, even to say, yeah, like now I'm beating myself up because I should just be grateful that I have this job, and
Mm.
I'm not able to express my emotions because you're not able to receive them. And we then probably the cycle will continue to say, oh, well, this is my fault. I shouldn't have even brought up this topic,
Yeah.
to learn that it's a safe space to be able to release those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions.
Yeah.
Um,
And maybe it's
I can
not
absolutely see all
okay.
of that.
Yeah, and maybe it's not okay to express it, and then people pretend. They pretend about a lot of things that they're fine, that they're not thinking things, that they're not feeling things, because isn't that what everybody wants them to do? That's the message that many people receive. And then they crave connection and they feel alone in their struggles. And we've got to find people that are comfortable with emotions, with their own emotions to surround ourselves
Mhm.
with. So that's one of my goals is to, have a community where women can show up like that and feel support that maybe they've never felt before.
Yes, I love that. I am thinking as Jess is talking and you're sharing about how even just like a handful of weeks ago, and my husband's going to be listening. He knows what we got into when I'm like, I'm going to have a podcast. But we were in a discussion and I think I was having a hard time. I can't even remember exactly what it was about. And he was cheering me up and or trying to find a solution. And I was like, you know what, babe, all I need you to do is just say, like, I'm really sorry you're going through that. I'm sure that's really hard for you. And I'm here for you. And I'm going to flip it because I am the ultimate optimist. And I try to turn everything into a positive situation and positive mindset. It happened for a reason. But sometimes what he probably needs, what I know he needs is like a hug and hey, I realize you are having a hard time and I'm
Mhm.
here to like allow you to express that. And I recognize these scenarios in my own life, but hearing somebody else say it, it really just like resonates so much deeper.
Mm,
Yeah.
I'm so happy it
And
does. Yeah.
these are strategies and, insights that you've brought to women probably all over the world now since you've left NASA as a psychologist and decided to start your own. Is it a program? Is it a group program? You said community. You mentioned that you really want to develop a community for other females that are maybe going through these perfectionist tendencies as well.
Yeah, I have a virtual program and I do one-on-one coaching. We also have retreats and like 2-day retreats and 4-day retreats. And that's where I've really been able to make progress with the community because even though it's only a few women at a time, it is so impactful in a situation where most have never experienced anything like it before. And then they walk away with so many benefits, including knowing, like really knowing, like, oh my goodness, I am not alone. And I've just found that so many women, including the old me, felt alone in these struggles.
I think it'd be safe to say, Dr. Steph, that someone might be at lunchtime in the first day of your retreat and having an eye-opening experience. Like what a beautiful way to kind of come full circle from where you were at and now you are
Yeah,
sharing that. I love that. It's so beautiful.
thank you. It's really, really rewarding. I got a little teary-eyed. Thank
Oh.
you. Yeah.
Well, we need women to support and lift other women. And you said only four people in a retreat, but how special to have four people that you build a really intense connection with. And
Oh,
how
I said
they're
a
going to
few.
go into their own communities. What was that?
Oh, I said a few. Yeah, so like 10.
Oh, well, that's not for, but you still
Yeah,
said only. But I still like it's the same message is,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not like a huge conference room where you're speaking to
Right.
thousands of people, but you are impacting them on such a like deep level, and then they will take that into their communities, and I think that's really, really amazing.
Thank
So,
you.
is this where the BRAVE method comes in? I know that you have something called the BRAVE method, and it's an all caps acronym.
Yeah.
Is it an acronym for something?
It's
I'm
an
just
acronym.
assuming it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the foundation of everything that I do is Brave branded, but Brave principles are used in my one-on-one coaching, my virtual programs, my retreats. Yeah.
What
And
is
it
the
takes,
acronym?
well, I could go into all the words that it stands for, but it probably won't mean too much to people. But essentially, what it comes down to is changing your relationship with your emotions, radical acceptance, reducing defensiveness, which most people have no idea what that truly is. Like every single human is defensive every single day. And it comes back to your relationship with your emotions and what you're avoiding feeling insecurities and things. So, and then the last piece of it is really self acceptance and self compassion so that we can bring more of that to the world.
Oh, I love that so much. I feel like you brought up the defensiveness, and sometimes I naturally end up being that way, and I don't even really realize it, because the self-awareness comes later when you replay the
Sure.
conversation in your head. Oftentimes, at least for me, I found that when I replay a conversation, I'm like, wow, I actually felt like maybe I was acting defensive because I was trying to project because I wasn't willing to accept that internal emotion or that emotion that was maybe coming up in me that I didn't want to feel in that moment. So I pushed it down and I acted defensive. What's a strategy that I could take, or maybe anyone else listening that could take, like in that moment where we're starting to feel that uncomfortable emotion kind of come up in a conversation? Whether it's with a loved one or maybe it's with a challenging relationship that comes up that these things are going to come up in, and you're going to feel
Hmm.
you're going to have to repress emotions. What are some things that strategies that I or others could take in that situation, you think?
Yeah. Okay. So, first, since we are talking to perfectionists here, the goal is not to completely remove defensiveness. The goal is to reduce how often it happens and to recover more quickly. So, I just got defensive with somebody on Friday. We are human and naturally we have a lot of that come up. So, what I have a survey for women to use, and it's signs of defensiveness to basically show you in writing what does defensiveness look like behaviorally so that I can catch myself really quickly. Because the more that you're able to catch yourself quickly, when you have other skills like building this self accountability piece where you believe that you can choose to show up differently, then you're able to make a different choice. Because a lot of us, we are using kind of similar versions of what we were using as children. It's probably more mature than when we were a child, but our brain is like on autopilot. So the work that we do together is like, how do we start building that side road, that new neural pathway to be able to choose differently and recover more quickly? And circling back as soon as you realizing it and like owning up to it is a really big deal. Like, not, I mean, I've interacted with many individuals that don't do that circle back, that kind of brush it under the rug, and that's not helpful. And that doesn't teach your brain to do differently next time. But that contributes to you being able to choose differently next time, is you basically showing yourself, like, I'm going to set aside the ego. I'm going to circle back. I'm going to take ownership for this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And this as you say, it was a quiz that you have or a worksheet that somebody could take. Is this something that they can get from you? Is this something that they get when they get access inside the Brave Method
Yeah,
program with
inside
you?
the
Or I'm
program.
like looking at like, I want this tool. How do I get this tool?
You're like, can I have it? I mean, I can share it with you for sure. It's not as useful without the full context of the program, but
Sure.
because what happens, and this is okay, but I can share it with you and then you'll be like, okay, but now what? So, and that's what I
That
teach
makes
you
sense.
is, yeah, how do we use it to reduce defensiveness? I love
Yeah,
that
I
you're
want to touch
recognizing
on,
yourself.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that's exactly where I was headed, Dr. Steph.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on the fact that it is a practice.
Yes.
So it's like the first step is actually maybe recognizing it. And then maybe like after you've recognized it, the second step that some people, it sounds like, do not do is coming back to the person perhaps they were defensive with and saying, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. And then on another level, it's like, actually, this is why I reacted that way. And then there's
Yeah.
even healing deeper within that.
Yes.
And then eventually, like, shortening it down so that you're not reacting and coming back like 24 hours later or 2 hours
Yeah.
later, but it's more like in the moment you have the strategy to, just like you in
Yeah.
your car when you run
Right.
out of gas, like you put in the practice and you have the mindset now where your
Yeah.
reaction is different, but I'm sure it took time to get to that point. And
Yeah. And the
yeah.
thing is that it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Sometimes, well,
Mm.
actually, many of my clients, they went to therapy for years. And this is what they tell me. Like, I'm going to tell you the most recent one. I went to therapy for 10 years and I made more progress in your 4-day retreat. So, because of the framework and the exact tools that you need outlined and handed and taught to you, it can be so different than if you're just showing up at therapy and you're talking for most of the time and working through individual issues. I personally have found having the framework to lean back on, it expedites the process so much, which who doesn't want to save time and money, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
mean inner work is challenging, so and it's hard to recognize these tendencies in yourself. Maybe you're not recognizing them yet, or you're at the point where you are recognizing them and you're questioning like what is wrong with me? Why do I act this way?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The phases of healing, really. I
yeah,
think that, first self-awareness, and then once you become self-aware, what do you do with that information? You might not
Yeah.
have the tools yet to know what to do with it, but I think what you touched on, which sounds like it really speeds up the process, is this clear blueprint that people can
Yeah.
follow, which is nice because oftentimes people are sort of stuck with like, maybe I notice these things in myself, but I just don't really know what to do. I don't know how to take the next step. So having someone like you, who has a background in psychology and also has a background in understanding how to work with people that are high achievers and perfectionism, that you've created this blueprint, if you will, to give them the tools that they need in those moments to make it happen quicker.
Yes, yes. And one thing that I want to add, because I love that you brought up self-awareness, and I think where people miss this a little bit is it's not just awareness of how you're showing up or your behaviors or your reactions. The key is self-awareness about the insecurities. What's
mm,
underneath. So that's more of that root cause. And that's a
hmm
big part of the work that we do together is understanding that. Because once you know those, then you know more like, okay, what exactly do I need to do to overcome this? Versus a lot of confusion when I have self-awareness around, okay, I'm losing it on people or I'm feeling anxious, then what do we do with that? So it's less of a behavioral approach and more of a root cause approach, which I'm sure in your field you can relate to that completely.
it's coming back to why am I this way? Or like
Yes.
what happened to me in my life that conditioned me to react like this. And once
Yeah.
you have that awareness, speaking from experience, once I had the awareness of why I was reacting a certain way, it actually made so much sense, and it was really freeing because then I
Yeah,
was able to say, that doesn't have to be who I am or what my future is. I can decide for myself,
I
and
love that.
yeah, I love it. So Jess brought up the high achievers piece, which I do want to touch on. So you work with high achievers and women, like
Hmm.
a lot of business owners or people in high level positions, people that are mothers. Like, tell us a little bit more about that high achiever piece and how you work specifically to them.
Yes. So my like favorite clients, they are so smart and ambitious and they're all over the place. I have some who are executives, I have some who are business owners, entrepreneurs, and I have some who are stay-at-home moms, but they still identify with the struggles and they still identify with, even though I'm a stay-at-home mom right now, I am an ambitious woman and I want to um, shift generational cycles and breaks negative patterns. So, um, a little bit of everybody.
That's amazing because I think you described our audience.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, because I mean,
I think oftentimes, like, though you were like, and even stay-at-home mothers, and I think sometimes
yeah,
people are like, how could they be high achievers? But we forget that they had a whole life before they became a
they
mom and had
did.
children, and maybe they
mhm.
were in a high executive role, or maybe they had these ambitious goals and then they became a mom.
And
And
they
so it
still
Yeah.
doesn't
do, and they still do. And there
exactly
is, and they're right now they're putting their energy into being a high achieving mother, which is
mhm,
a
Yes,
lot of pressure.
it is. That
100%.
is the hardest
Um,
job.
Yeah,
yeah,
we can all speak to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, cool. It was so nice having you on the podcast, Dr. Steph. I so appreciate all of the insight that you gave us. Is there anything else that you want to tell listeners that you don't feel like we've touched on yet around this topic of high achieving, perfectionism, strategies that we can implement in the moment? Is there anything else that you feel like we're missing or that you feel like would be really helpful?
This might just be like a one phrase summary, but everything that you want is truly on the opposite side of what you're avoiding.
Mm, that is powerful.
Yeah, repeat it. I'm like, I love the repeating lines because it's
Yes.
really like, I just want to hear it again so I can process it more. We'll just say
Yeah.
that.
Everything that you want is on the opposite side of what you're avoiding.
It's on the opposite side of what you are avoiding.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. Wonderful. Well, how do people find you? What is the best social platforms so that they can connect with you deeper and get to know you deeper as well?
The, the best place to find me is on Instagram. My handle is Dr. Stephanie Lopez, Dr. Stephanie Lopez. That's where I am most of the time. I have a TikTok account, but I'm not actively posting, so not the best place. So find me on Instagram.
Okay. I'll be sure to put all of that into the show notes so that we people can get in touch with you. And yeah, there was the retreat. I wanted to ask you, where is your next retreat? Because, we all need a destination retreat. Where is it
Yes.
hosted?
My next one is in Orlando, Florida, and I have 2 seats left.
Okay. All right.
Okay, and so this is the Brave Accelerator retreat, or is this the program that goes along with the retreat?
It's called Bravecation, and right now it's separate, but probably about 50% of people after attending Bravecation sign up for the Brave Accelerator, and then some who did the Brave Accelerator first come to the retreat.
That makes sense. I bet having both of them, that, in-person immersion over
Mhm.
days, like plays a huge role. But the continued support is probably what really moves the needle, I'm sure.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Well, I feel like I should have had a notepad out and like took a little bit of notes, but luckily I'll be re-listening. So, yeah.
Yes,
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
so
having
much, Dr.
me.
Steph.
Thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. So appreciate you and all your wisdom that you've brought to us today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on.